Every year when we start planning for Thanksgiving, my partner will ask, can we have pumpkin pie? And every year I kind of just roll my eyes because why? There's so many better pies out there. There's apple pie, there's cherry pie, there's berry pie, but you want pumpkin pie. So most years we do end up making it, and I always feel the same way. Why? Not why do we make it? We make it because I love my partner, but why do you like this? It's kind of sweet. The pumpkin flavor isn't that amazing. What really gets me though is the texture. It reminds me so much of baby food with some spices thrown in. So I thought that this year, since it's still a little bit ahead of Thanksgiving, I could experiment with some different pumpkin pie variations to try and make something that I actually want to eat too. I have a few different ideas that I'm going to be trying out today. Now, normally I make my own pie crust. I have a recipe that I really like, but since I'm really just trying to test filling recipes today, I'm going to be using store-bought pie crusts just to make things a little bit quicker. All right, let's get started with my first pumpkin pie idea, which I am going to call caramel bay leaf pumpkin pie. So the first thing I'm gonna do is roast my canned pumpkin. I know that might sound a little bit silly, but my hope is it's going to add some caramelized flavors to it, as well as reduce some of the excess moisture, leaving us with a richer pie filling. So I've spread the pumpkin out on a baking tray, and I'm gonna put it in the oven at 400 degrees. I'm thinking for about 10 minutes, but we'll see what it looks like. We're gonna start with making a caramel, starting with half a cup of oat milk. And this is where we're going to infuse our bay leaves. I'm using some California bay leaves that I actually picked myself. And these are a good bit stronger than your standard bay leaves. I'm gonna go with 2 of them. We do wanna get a nice amount of bay flavor in this caramel sauce. This milk is scalding, so we're gonna take it off the heat and leave the bay leaves in so they continue to infuse. All right, we've got a cup of sugar, and we're adding just like 1 or 2 tablespoons of water to help it melt without burning. It's okay to mix the sugar in right at the beginning, but in general, you don't really want to stir caramel while you're making it because you risk crystallizing the sugar crystals, which can give you a gritty caramel. So when you caramelize sugar, the Maillard reaction is what's making all the great caramel flavor happening. Those browning flavors are really what makes caramel taste delicious and not just sweet. Trick with making caramel is to stop at just the right point because caramel can go from brown to burnt quite quickly. I think we're on the cusp. The color is starting to change more rapidly and I can smell almost like toasted nuts. Yeah, I think I'm gonna call it. It's not as obvious on camera, but it's turning really golden. So I took it off the heat and then I'm gonna add some butter and mix it in. Now we're gonna add our bay oat milk back in, but we're gonna leave the actual bay leaves out. I'm next gonna add a nice pinch of salt, and I'm gonna transfer it to a heat-proof bowl. For just that extra little bay flavor, I'm gonna add 1 bay leaf to the caramel to infuse as it cools. Here's my pumpkin, steaming hot from the oven. It feels thicker than when I started, and you can see at the edges especially how it's starting to dry out. I cooked it for 10 minutes, stirred, and then another 10 minutes. Just out of curiosity, I think I'm gonna see how much it weighs to see if this did in fact reduce in volume. All right, so we started at 29 ounces, and right now we're at just about 22 ounces. So it looks like we lost about 7 ounces of liquid in the roasting process. And I'm gonna be using this to make 2 pies. Start with our roasted pumpkin puree. Next, we're adding half a cup of oat milk, and I'm using an extra creamy oat milk for all my oat milks today. 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar. 1/4 cup of vegan butter that we've gone ahead and melted. 2 tablespoons of miso paste. 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and your spices. For this version, I'm just gonna keep it simple and use a pumpkin pie spice, which is just a mix of warming spices. Things like clove, nutmeg, cinnamon, And I'm doing a tablespoon. I'm gonna go ahead and give this a blend until it is perfectly smooth. Let's assemble our first pie. My caramel did separate a little bit. I'm gonna add a few spoonfuls at the base. Next, we're gonna add this pumpkin custard that we made. Just pour this caramel on top. I don't want it to stay on the top, but I also don't want it to mix in. Basically just fold it over. Let's go with that. That looks good and lumpy. I'm gonna save the rest of this caramel to put on the top. And it's time for this pie to go in the oven. This second version we're gonna make is going to include another seasonal bit of produce that is perfectly ripe come late fall. The persimmon. Let's get started on pie number 2. We're gonna use the second half of our roasted pumpkin puree, a 1/4 cup of oat milk, which is 60 grams, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar. Cardamom is my favorite warming spice. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, about 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/2 teaspoon of cloves. Next, we're going to peel 2 persimmons. I actually just squeezed it out of the flesh. Let's blend that up and give it a taste. I almost want like a touch of acid. I'm gonna add about 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid, which is about the same as the juice in 1 lemon. Again, I would normally use lemon here, but I don't have it. The other thing I think it needs is some black pepper. Much better. Then I wasn't sure if I wanted to try this with persimmons on the top or not, so I think I'm gonna do 1/2 of it that way. This puppy is off to the oven. And for the final pumpkin pie that I'm gonna try out today, I thought we would switch things up and make a savory version. For a savory pie, we're gonna use a pumpkin, still in the shape of a pumpkin. I'm gonna grab a grapefruit spoon to scrape out all the seeds and innards. And then I'm just going to do my best to remove the skin of the pumpkin. You wanna use the right type of pumpkin in your pumpkin pie, as lots of ornamental pumpkins are really not good tasting. I have actually heard many people say that the real secret to a good pumpkin pie is to just not actually use pumpkin at all and use something like a butternut squash. But we'll see. I will say off the bat, that kind of feels like cheating to me. Either way, if you're using pumpkin, you wanna make sure that you use a baking pumpkin or a sugar pumpkin. Now that we've got our pumpkin peeled, I'm gonna cut it into wedges, kind of like that. Now I suspect we will only need 1/2 of this pumpkin, but I'm gonna make it all anyway. Before we put our pumpkin in the oven, we're just gonna drizzle it with some oil, salt, and pepper. Our savory pie is gonna be the only one where we don't actually put pumpkin in our custard, but we are gonna be making a custard of sorts with silken tofu. So I caramelized 3 onions, and I went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to put them in the tart as is or blend them into the custard. I think I'm just gonna blend them into the custard. Next, I'm gonna add about a 1/4 cup of fermented tofu. This will give it a really intense umami flavor. Grind in some white pepper, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, just the teensiest bit of nutmeg. That might have been a 1/4 teaspoon. 2 cloves of garlic. And we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of nutritional yeast. I'm also gonna add some richness with about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Now we're gonna give it all a good blend. I almost forgot about spices. I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of herbes de Provence. It's smooth, it's creamy. It's time to go into our tart. I'm sorry, pumpkin pie. And let's add the pumpkin to this pumpkin pie. Let's put her in the oven. Persimmon pie is done and it looks really well set. Now the kind of hard thing about pie is you actually do have to let it cool. I'm just gonna let them set overnight and film the rest of this video tomorrow. Our pies are all cooled. It's the next day, so it's time to do a tasting. Now, the day is November 6th. So, the fact that I'm standing here tasting pies feels a bit weird. I'm not really sure what else to be doing though, so We're gonna taste some pies together. Let's start off with the first one we made, this bay caramel pumpkin pie. So this pie ended up looking a little bit sticky on top and I wasn't sure if it was done. That, however, I believe was just the caramel. If I make it again, I may just put the caramel on top next time. I also garnished with some candied pecans. I thought that would help with the texture, and I layered more of that caramel on top as well. Also, some vegan whipped cream. But here we go. It might be a little bit overly soft. The candied pecans on top are just really doing it for me. That, along with that subtle, almost unrecognizable savoriness from the miso, really adds something to this. The sweetness of the bay leaf adds a nice herbaceous note to it, but I would say the major upgrade here from regular pumpkin pie is just the candied pecans on top. This recipe is great. I think it could use a few tweaks. I actually love everything about the flavor and most things about the texture of this recipe. Where we could improve is by not cooking the caramel into the pie. Maybe just cooking a little bit less of it and just using it as a topping, because I think it overall made the texture of the pie a little bit too soft. And I didn't get what I was kind of hoping to get, which would be distinct layers or pockets of caramel. It did just meld into the rest of the filling. Next, persimmon pumpkin pie. With this one, I added vegan whipping cream on top and then just a little sprinkle of cardamom on top of that. Here's our persimmon pumpkin pie. I like the texture of this pie more, and I like the persimmons. I think the lemon juice plus the cardamom are making it a little bit more acidic than I want. When I taste the filling before I cooked it, I thought it needed some acid. But now that it's cooked, I wonder if maybe that was the wrong call. I still like the concept of this pie. I just don't think it's as much of an upgrade as I would like it to be. Finally, our savory pumpkin pie. With this one, I fried up some sage leaves in vegan butter and put them on top, and that is all I've done since I last saw you. Little pie crust section. With this pie particularly, I'm finding that the lower crust is a little bit underdone. So I think this one would need a longer par bake on the crust. Very creamy, very savory. I think if I made this one again, I'd probably do less of the tofu filling because I think it's overpowering the pumpkin. This is delicious, but it's definitely not the same as a dessert pumpkin pie. I mean, who thought it would be? That's it. That's all I got today. I guess my final thoughts. I like this savory pie. I'll probably make it again. If you want to make it as a Thanksgiving main, that might work, but it's not really like a pumpkin pie. Persimmon pumpkin pie. I'm probably gonna try this again, but with a little bit less acid and maybe more persimmon as well, and see how that goes. Bay caramel pumpkin pie. This one I'm absolutely going to be trying again, but next time I make it, I'm not gonna integrate the caramel into the pie itself. I'm just gonna add it as a topping. And there we go. Let me know in the comments if you have any tweaks on pumpkin pie that you do to make it a little bit more interesting. Subscribe if you're interested in sticking around, and hang in there.